Welcome back to Bob and Jeff Show, KFH Radio. We are thrilled to have Craig Ferguson as our next guest. He'll be performing at the Orpheum Theater tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. A few tickets still available. You need to get down and see Mr. Ferguson, who I have difficulty, Craig, and first of all, welcome to the show. I have difficulty really identifying you. You are all over the place, books, movies, television. I guess I'd call you a comedic entrepreneur. Is that a good description?
Yeah, you could call me that, or you could call me something a little less flattering, maybe some kind of showbiz grifter or an immigrant taking jobs that Americans don't want. I don't know what it is, but it's all, for me, it's all part of the same thing. But the bottom line is stand-up comedy. That was where I started, and that's what my thing is. It's kind of like, if you learn to play the violin, or the fiddle, you go and you play it, and then you play with an orchestra, or you'll maybe compose some music, or you'll maybe, play in a band, or maybe you'll write a score for a movie. But really what you do is you play a fiddle. That's what you do, and that's what I do. And I do stand-up. That's my thing.
Yeah, so I'm always intrigued by the comedians who will come to Wichita. We don't get all of them, but we get several big names, and I'm just curious how your talk show and everything else that you've done have helped you appeal to Middle America, and what kind of experiences you've had in front of Midwestern audiences in the past.
I think that the Midwestern audiences are kind of like they're kind of like Midwestern people, is like they're polite, but they ain't stupid, and that's a mistake I think a lot of people make in the Midwest. I love it. It's always, Wichita has always been a regular stop for me on tours, and I'm going up through Kansas City and all over, and go to Iowa and Des Moines and Iowa City and Des Moines. I always make sure I do the Midwest. That's it's America.
Talking with Craig Ferguson again at the Orpheum Theater. He will be performing tomorrow night, the 22nd, at 8 o'clock. So you really you really got on my radar when you were on the Drew Carey Show. I'm sure that's not the first time you've heard that. Do you view that as your biggest breakthrough of your career, or was it later when you got your own late-night talk show?
I think both of these things were kind of a gear change, It's like when you get to work, the Drew Carey Show, which was in the 90s, was, I love doing that, and I'm still friends with most of the cast of that show and still see each other and stuff, and it was a great time, and that was a kind of boom time for sitcoms as well. The internet was kind of in its infancy, and people still watched network TV in a way that they kind of don't anymore. And then the late night show was just a different animal. That was like getting a rocket tied to your butt. That just takes off and you go where it's going. So it was they were both gear changes. Breakthrough, yeah, I suppose they were, both of them.
Yeah, for sure. So I saw a print interview that you've done recently, and it was before a stop on your tour, and you talked about, something will come up. So, how much of your performance is just kind of a riff and talking about whatever comes to your mind, and how much is quote-unquote material?
Well, it's kind of a hybrid, because the reason I love stand-up is because it is an organic one-off thing. That's why I love live stand-up comedy. So, I'll give you an example. The other night, I'm doing a show somewhere in Colorado, and about 10 minutes into the show, a very nice old lady walked up the front of the stage, past security, and not that there was that much security, but she walked up and she handed me a photograph of my own dog that she'd printed out from the internet. And it's like, well, thank you so much, sweetheart, for that picture of my own dog. I've got some pictures of my own dog, but you can't have too many. And then, of course, the thing is that event turns into a whole running joke for that evening. Now, I'm never going to do that dog bit again, but that's what happens that night. And stand-up for me, live stand-up is like that in the sense that it will always only exist in that place in that evening, and that's why I love it most of all. Right now, people see a lot of stand-up, in little clips on TikTok or YouTube and stuff like that, and I think that's a pretty good way to do it because they just watch little bits. For me, if you're going to watch a whole stand-up show, I mean, I'm on stage for nearly 2 hours. So in order to do that, you kind of have to be there. You don't want to watch it on your TV. You want to be there. I mean, I've made stand-up specials, and they're okay, but it's much better to be in the room.
Talking with comedian Craig Ferguson. He'll be at the Orpheum tomorrow night. So your years of doing the Late Show, and you did that for a long time. I've always been curious. I've never spoken to anybody who hosted a network late-night show, so you're the first person I'm going to ask this question of. Were there guests that you knew would be hot and guests that you knew that wouldn't be?
In the sense of would they be able to have a conversation and hang out and be relaxed? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm thinking specifically of Don Rickles, who seemed to love being on your show.
It's because he was my friend. I loved Don so much. The first time, it was a big honor for me when I got to meet Don, and he's a huge legend in American comedy, just in American show business. And you wouldn't meet a sweeter man. You just couldn't meet a sweeter man. All that, the kind of acerbic nature of his stand-up was not who he was in his life. He was such a sweet man. And him and Barbara, his wife, came to my house. The first time they came to a dinner party at my house, he got to my house, and I opened the door. He gave me $1, and he said, "Look, I want you to put that towards getting a better house." And I said, I think that guy, I don't know if everyone responds to that, but to me, I loved him so much. So when he was on the show, he would, he'd have a go at me, but I could also have a go at him because he knew I loved him. And so I always knew it was fine. So a lot of people who came on the old show became friends of mine. Robin Williams was a friend of mine. Carrie Fisher was a friend of mine. Angela Kinsey is still a friend of mine. They're people become, you meet people at work, and some of them you become friends with, and some of them you don't.
Yeah, definitely. So, you hear a lot of veteran, quote-unquote, comedians these days talking about what you can't say and you can't talk about this. You don't seem like you would ever have that complaint or that problem. So for you personally, what has kind of been the biggest adjustment in the stand-up world over the last 30 years or so? How have you had to kind of grow and evolve with the times?
I don't worry too much about what you can and can't say. I think that, I always, the criteria I always had for comedy is, does it make me laugh? Obviously attitudes change over time, and, there are things that do that, but I don't really get overly concerned about that. The only one big change that I have done, that I have made personally, is that about 6 or 7 years ago, I made a stylistic choice to not do any political humor at all. None. Absolutely zero. No politics, no politicians mentioned, no position taken in a political environment. And the reason I did that really was more because I wanted to experiment with it, because everyone else seemed to be, heading in a different direction. And I have a friend, a good friend, he's a good stand-up, Jim Gaffigan, and you know Jim, right? Jim made a stylistic choice that he would never cuss during the show. Now, that's a stylistic. Now, I know Jim cusses as much as anybody else cusses in their life, but he made a stylistic choice, and he gave himself a challenge to do stand-up without doing that, which I thought was interesting. So I thought I would do the same myself with politics. How do you make it funny? How do you make it engaging and current and right now and most of all funny, but not do politics? Because I got kind of sick of it.
So, Craig, I know my dad has one more question, but I just wanted to sort of thank you, I guess, in a way, for the show The Hustler, because that was one of those post-pandemic shows. I don't know why it wasn't picked up, but for me personally, it got me through some times where I was getting a little lonely during that pandemic. I watched that show every week, and I thought you were great on it. Thought it was a great concept. I don't know if with the writer's strike and everything, if that would ever come back, but I enjoyed that show.
Well, thank you, Angelo. We actually shot it during the pandemic, so it was a very, very tricky show to do. Everybody had to be tested all the time, and there were like a lot of medical staff around. We were doing it, but I like doing that show. And yeah, you never know with a show. They come and go. If there's one thing I know about show business, you just never know what's coming next.
Yep.
So, and we're again talking with Craig Ferguson. The final question: you obviously came to America from Scotland and hit it big as a comedian. But I think recently you've moved, in the last few years, you've moved back to Scotland. Did you do that to avoid hurricanes?
No, because like anyone who moves to Scotland for the weather is a damn fool. No, what I'm in Scotland a lot of the time, but I actually spend a lot of the time in the United States as well. I have a place in New York, and I'm there a lot of the time. So I'm lucky enough to have a place in Scotland, but if you talk to the IRS, they will assure you every year they come right to me, and I'm still an American.
Well, I made that reference to hurricanes because I believe you were headquartered in Los Angeles for a while, certainly.
I was. I was there 23 years.
Yeah, there you go. Well, we appreciate it. Yeah, before you leave, tell us a little bit about your show. What should people look forward to?
Well, look, I think what you can look forward to is this. I'll be there. You'll be there. I can't promise any more than that. I'm not going to talk about any political stuff. So if you want that, there's plenty of other places to get it. But other than that, I'll be there.
Well, we really appreciate your time. Best of luck on your tour, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Speak to you soon.